Hello, everybody. I'm Secular Spirit, and welcome to my first ever live AMA. So, I had the idea to do this for Ex-Muslim Awareness Month, which was this past December. And for those of you who don't know, Ex-Muslim Awareness Month is, as you can guess from the name, about just spreading awareness about the experiences and challenges of ex-Muslims. And for those who already know about those experiences and challenges, it's Ex-Muslim Appreciation Month. And the whole idea is it's so important that Muslims who might not understand why ex-Muslims leave Islam learn more about those reasons. And it's also important for non-Muslims to just really understand what the consequences of leaving Islam are. And the whole idea is to hopefully normalize leaving Islam one day where it's not a big deal, doesn't lead to ostracization from society or getting disowned from your family. And yeah, I hope just from talking about my experiences on this channel and from sharing the experiences of other ex-Muslims, we can help make that happen. It's not going to be easy. It's going to take a long time, but you got to start somewhere. So yeah, for this AMA, I'm going to be answering questions that I collected during December, during Ex-Muslim Awareness Month. And thank you to everyone who did ask questions. I got a lot of interesting ones, and some of them really got me thinking. Some were really thought-provoking, and I'm really excited to get into them. And what I'll mention to anyone watching live right now is I'm happy to also answer questions that you ask me in the live chat, so you can feel free to do so in the live chat. And you'll also notice that there's a poll question for you all in the live chat too. And the question is, can you have meaning and purpose in life without religion? So if there's one thing I want people to take away from my channel, is that my answer to that question is yes, you can have meaning and purpose in life without religion. So that's pinned in the live chat. Feel free to vote at any point for that, and I'll keep track of it and share the results later on in the live stream. So with that out of the way, I also wanted to just say, if you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do so. I actually just hit 5,000 subscribers a couple of days ago, which is amazing. Hope to hit 10,000 very, very soon. I like the progress that this channel has had and just getting more and more views and just reaching more and more people. It's really exciting, and it really shows that there's a lot of people who want to have a more nuanced and empathetic approach to the topic of criticizing religion, which is what I hope I bring. And so that's really motivating to see that more and more people are subscribing. So if you haven't subscribed already, please do so, and please don't forget to like this video. All right, so let's get started. So I'm dividing the questions into a couple of groups of topics, and I'm going to start with the questions I got asked about Islam or spirituality. So let's get going there first of all. And just a reminder to anyone tuning in, like to see some familiar faces there. Hello, everyone. Feel free to ask me any questions in the live chat too, and I'll try to get to them as well. All right. So the first question, is pulling it up here. So this question was from YouTube, from Arrow Moncel 1521. So Arrow Moncel 1521 asks, are you an atheist, or do you have some type of spiritual belief? Is that the reason you call yourself Secular Spirit? So I figured this would be a good question to get started, especially for people who might not be as familiar with my channel. So the short answer is yes, I'm an atheist, and I don't have any belief or faith in an organized religion. So why did I call this channel Secular Spirit? Why did I use that word spirit? And I've heard some people say in comments over the years that isn't that kind of an oxymoron, secular and spirit? And I mean, in a way it is, I suppose, but that was the idea. What I wanted to do is to take this word of spirituality and show that it doesn't have to be this specific domain that's tied to dogmatic or organized religions, or faith in completely unknown things like a creator god or an afterlife that we can't see or experience here. So, for me and for a lot of people, spirituality is about the journey of finding meaning and purpose and fulfillment in life. And for a lot of human history, that has been the domain of organized religion. That's what religions do. They teach you what your meaning is and what your purpose is and what you should be doing in life. And what I wanted to do is express how I managed to find ways to find meaning and fulfillment without religion through secular means. So, uh, what does that mean in a nutshell? So, it means that I find purpose and meaning without needing to believe in some entity. You want to call it God, or you want to call it, a benevolent, loving force, or anything like that, to be able to have a meaningful, fulfilling life. So I do those things even without the belief of in that, and I also do it without the belief in a heaven or another plane of existence that we're all going to ascend to. I believe it without believing that I have a soul that is separate from my physical body and that will continue to persist in some way. So I don't know for sure that all of those things aren't true, that there isn't a God, that there isn't an afterlife, and that I don't have a soul. But I see no evidence for any of those things, and so I don't believe in them, and that's what makes me an atheist in that regard. So that's why I called it secular spirit, because I think it's important to talk about these things and to share how people find fulfillment in life outside of the language of religion. So going forward, more long term in the channel, that's what I'm going to be doing more and more of. So a lot of what I talk about now is criticisms of organized religion, while trying to insert here and there how I and others have found meaning and purpose without it. But I want to get more into the other ways that people who were even just born atheist and lived their whole lives atheist have found meaning, and the approaches that they've taken to life when facing, the big challenges, when you get a terminal disease, or you see a loved one die, or you go through a horrible accident, or when you see just the state of the world today, and it can be very depressing. There's natural disasters everywhere. There's always looming threats that can keep you up at night, and religion can be a comfort for a lot of those things. But I think that we can comfort ourselves and take action to address those harms without needing to rely on religion. So I'm an atheist, and that's why I call it secular spirit. And it's good to see some questions already in the live chat. So I'm just going to save some of them and try to pair them with the topic of Islam and spirituality just to start. Okay. All right, next question. All right, this is okay. This one made me laugh when I first saw it. So from Andre D 7684, also off YouTube. Have you ever had pig? If yes, did you like it? So I've been an ex-Muslim and atheist for going on 16, 17 years, something like that. And so, yes, I have had pork. I've had it in all its various shapes and forms. And I know that for some ex-Muslims, it's a little bit of a big moment, or maybe a symbolic moment, to finally have pork for the first time. I've seen some posts from ex-Muslims online where they show themselves with a strip of bacon, or a, a pot roast or something like that. I had nothing like that. I think just one day I probably just got something and it had some bacon in it. And I would say I don't like every single form of pork. I'm not a big fan of the pot roasts. I do, or sausages, that much really. I do like bacon. Bacon is pretty darn good. I even like pea meal bacon, just a little bit in a pizza, or even like bacon crumbs, crumbles in a Caesar salad. Really, really good. The thing I thought that might be fun to mention here at this point is that I actually, so I do eat pork, but I actually don't drink alcohol, which is, I think, the thing that people find more surprising. So, for those of you who don't know, drinking alcohol is considered forbidden, a sin, haram in Islam, and so I didn't drink alcohol when I was Muslim. And anyway, I was underage, so I didn't drink alcohol anyway for that reason. Uh, but uh, this isn't like some kind of latent Muslim attachment thing or anything like that. I did drink alcohol when I was in university and throughout my early to mid 20s, and overdrank, I would say, as well during my university years. And I stopped, and it was actually mostly for health reasons. So I noticed that I seem to have, uh, I wouldn't call it an allergic reaction to alcohol, but basically a sensitivity, I would say. So I would find myself waking up the next morning and I would feel bloated and a little sick almost, and my tongue would also be bloated and my tonsils and everything. And overall, I just didn't really feel good after drinking alcohol. And in a lot of ways, you could say that, simply put, it is poisoning your body. And there's a lot of research that's coming in now, and some that concern me about how even just drinking a little bit of alcohol could really increase your chances of getting cancer. I mean, a lot of things that we have in our diets or in our environments could cause cancer, but that's one of them, alcohol, and one that I felt that I could easily avoid. Yeah, Herman in the live chat says no one feels good the day after alcohol, and I think for me that's what it was. The pros just didn't uh, outweigh the cons of drinking alcohol, so it was in that sense an easy thing for me to cut out. With that being said, I do not endorse or back whatsoever the Islamic approach to alcohol of just banning it outright and considering it a sin that will offend the creator of the universe. I think that's way too overboard, way too draconian. I think people should be free to make their own choices when it comes to this and other substances, actually. So, but yeah, so I'm an ex-Muslim who does not drink alcohol. So there you go. And let's see if I have any questions in the live chat that maybe could be related to all of this stuff. Okay. Okay, so here's one that I could potentially answer. It's related to Sam. So, Mr. Harris, thank you for your question. So, Mr. Harris asks, how would you deal with becoming an apostate while being married to a Muslim woman? Okay, that's a really interesting question. So, I think I should mention first that I have not been in this position. I've never been married. um, and I wasn't dating a Muslim woman when I became an ex Muslim. I think the most important thing to know about this is the level of communication and honesty that you have with your spouse, and understanding what their viewpoint on Islam is. Obviously, if it's someone who's very devout and who you've never communicated your doubts about Islam to before, it's going to be a difficult, awkward conversation. But if it's someone who is not as much of a devout Muslim, more of a relaxed Muslim, and who maybe was more aware of your doubts and uncertainties about Islam, where they wouldn't feel blindsided that you left, then that conversation might not be as difficult. But the thing that's common between both those scenarios and anything between those two extremes is, I think, conversations are really important, and uh, trying to be honest as long as you feel safe to do so. Here's one of the big challenges is, let's say you're living in a Muslim country, or not even a Muslim country, but a Muslim community in the West, in North America or Europe or wherever. There could be dire consequences to your personal life, to your career, if you reveal that even to your spouse, because at the end of the day, Islam is what is most important. Your relationship with Allah, God, is what's more important than your marriage. And that's especially true if there's kids involved, because then the spouse might be concerned about what's going to happen to the children. So you have to have those conversations, but in a safe way. And if you can't have them in a safe way, then the honest reality is you have two choices. You can either find some kind of compromise where you don't reveal the truth, but you don't participate in Islamic rituals, and maybe you can try to influence your children to, be more open-minded about religion or atheism, or to understand your perspective without revealing it all at the same time. So that's a compromise you can make. And a tougher one would be that if you feel like you can't be yourself with your spouse and they won't accept you as an apostate, then you'd have to leave them. And that's a tough decision. It's not easy, but I can understand why some people would take that drastic step, because you want to be loved and accepted for who you are, and you don't want to live a lie. You don't want to hide how you truly feel, especially if you see things that really upset you or trouble you, like, for example, the viewpoints of Islam on women or homosexuality, so on and so forth. So no easy answer for that. I think it starts with conversation, but you have to do it in a way in which uh, you don't endanger yourself. So I hope that answers uh, the question. Okay, let's see. I've got another live chat question. So interesting one here from BikePap4040. I hope I answered that. Sorry, sorry. I hope I said that correctly. Okay, so do you believe a post-religious society can have objective morality? Oh boy. Okay, so my personal viewing on this is that there's no such thing as an objective morality that exists beyond us as human beings and our institutions, that and our social consensus that changes over time. And I think that's true about the religion's morality too, the morality we get from religions. So religious people will say that their morality is objective because it comes from God. Well, first of all, that's assuming that this God is true and that their God is the correct one, and that we are able to actually learn what that creator God's morals are. So, assuming all those things are true, okay, sure. But I don't think that there's any good evidence for any gods that I've ever seen. And so, what we end up having really is different people from different eras, different contexts, telling us that this is God's objective morality. And as you can just see from the history of, let's just talk about the two main religions in the world, Islam and Christianity, that their morality and the morality of Christians and Muslims as a collective has evolved, has shifted over the centuries. And the one thing I always bring up is, if you just look at the viewpoints on things like slavery, or the role of women in society, and how that's completely changed. So sex slavery used to be something that was common and prevalent in Islamic societies, for example, and now it isn't. What changed? Did Islam's objective morality change? No, our subjective morality changed. So a post-religious society or a religious society, they all have subjective morality in my viewpoint. And so I don't think a post-religious society can have an objective morality, but what we can have is objective standards from which we can assess a subjective morality depending on what our goals are. And by that, I mean, let's say that we decide to focus on things like well-being in a specific way, like good health, happiness, and happiness meaning A, B, C, D, E, F, G. We could establish metrics or things that we think are better ways to have that fulfillment and happiness happen compared to other things that would make it worse. So, one possible way is maybe giving everyone free healthcare, or giving everyone a free education, or not restricting someone's expression of their sexuality, so on and so forth. And so that would be subjective in of itself to value those things, but then you could have an objective way of trying to, or an objective method of trying to make sure that those things happen. So even that, though, would be an evolving thing that would change depending on the more we learn about the human body, the more we learn about how the mind works, and perhaps maybe we'll learn that there are different things that we want to value, and that's a scary thing, I think, for some religious people. So there is a possibility that in a hypothetical future, maybe things that we deem important now will not be important, and maybe there's some things that people will value in the future, in the hypothetical future, in hundreds and hundreds of years, that we find immoral today. And I think there isn't really anything to avoid that. What's important is to focus on what we value as a society today, and that we have good reasons to value those things. So I hope that answers that one. Okay. So proof is in the pudding asks, what do I think Islam will look like in 20 years? So it's hard to answer this question because there's so many areas where you can talk. So you could talk about the Islam that's in the Muslim world, in the Middle East, or in other Muslim countries, or you can talk about the Islam in Europe, Islam in North America. If I was to try and summarize, we're seeing a lot of people turn to more fundamentalist and extreme, uh, more devout versions of Islam. And I think a lot of it is a reaction to problems in the modern world, like globalization and just the invasion of capitalism and materialism and Western values in other parts of the world where there's a lot of Muslims. And it's unsettling to see the rapid change in the world, and people losing their livelihoods, and people losing their grasp on what the landmarks in the world are, sorry. And so what a lot of people will do when they're faced with so many new things and so many things changing, is they'll turn to what's familiar, what's comfortable, what's been around for a long time. And for people in the Muslim world, that's Islam. So I think, in a way, when there are a lot of Muslims that are shifting towards being more devout in Islam, and this is true whether in the Muslim world or in the West, I think it's a reaction to that, and that could change as the world adapts to the rapid level of change that's happening. So, what a lot of people in the Muslim world are probably seeing is that there's more and more atheists and less religion in North America and in Europe, and even some Christians in those countries are viewing those things and becoming more religious as a reaction. But that aside, I don't think that's changing the overall trend that the world in its entirety is becoming more and more irreligious as we understand more about the world, and as we leave behind more of the superstitions and blind faith thinking of the past, and as religion becomes less important in that way to more and more people. So I would say, to generalize then, that Islam will probably be uh, less intense and less dogmatic and more reformed and more moderate in 20 years. Probably not by much, but it's probably going to go through the same long process that Christianity went through, where if you compare Christianity to 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 400 years ago, it's definitely become more relaxed and loosened and taken less seriously now for a lot of uh, Christians or people who come from a Christian background. And we'll probably see the same thing with Islam. It will just take a long, long, long time. All right. Okay. Let's see if you've got any more questions. Shane Wilson asks, hey Shane, good to see you. Do single Muslim men in Canada tend to have sex before marriage? I got to be honest with that one. I'm not really sure. I can only speak anecdotally and say that I've known many Muslim men who are single who have had sex multiple times before marriage, and a few who haven't. I think it really depends on the person. So I can't really say that there's any specific trend I've noticed in that front. Okay. And Huey Freeman, a new subscriber. Hey Huey, how's it going? I love the Boondocks. I think that's the character from the Boondocks. I haven't seen that show in a long time. In your avatar. Okay, so new follower here. When do we get to see collab with genetically modified skeptics? So I'm going to save that question for the end, actually, because I'm going to talk about some of my dream ideal collaborations I would love to do. I would love to do one with genetically modified skeptic. Those of you in the live chat might correct me if I'm mistaken, but I think he's done a couple of videos with friend of the channel, Apostate Aladdin. So who knows? Maybe that could be something we can do in the future if genetically modified skeptic is interested. I really like his channel, and I think he also has the same kind of approach to me of a little bit more empathy and understanding towards religious people. So I think that would be a really good one to do. Thanks for the suggestion too. Okay. Just looking in the live chat here to see if there's any more questions. Okay, so one more question in the live chat, and then I'll jump back to the ones that people asked me already before. Okay, so this question is from another friend from the channel. Oh boy, I'm gonna have to butcher the pronunciation of the Italian again. If you're watching, Nero, I apologize. So, a question from L'Islam spiegato de un cane. The question is, are there values of Islam that you still respect? So of course, yeah, of course there are. So what I always say about Islam is that, or any organized religion that I know well, like Christianity as well, is obviously not everything in them is bad. There's a lot of good teachings in them, or else, people wouldn't be so willing to follow them if it was all just bad or horrible things. There's a lot of good things in them too. So for Islam specifically, a lot of the things that I was taught as a kid resonated with me as a kid and still resonate with me today. And so things I was taught when I was Muslim was being modest, being humble, being caring and respectful towards others, to your parents, to think beyond yourself, to not be materialistic, to not attach yourself too much to materialistic things or money, whatever it happens to be. And to try and help others, I think, is something that really stuck with me as a Muslim. So that being said, obviously Islam teaches bad things as well, that prejudice and hate and fear, and so there's a lot of inconsistency when it comes to Islam, but I have to say that those values were also taught to me, and uh, so you can't just throw it all out, I would say. So yeah, those are ones that I still respect. It's just the problem with Islam is you got to take the bad with the good. uh, I think what we need to do is see the religions for what they are and try to take the best things out of them without taking, all the, toxic baggage. And I might get into that a little bit too in the next couple questions. Okay. All right. So, okay. Whoa, we actually got a couple more questions in the live chat, so I'll jump to those. Okay. Oh yeah, Hassan Radwan, thank you for joining. He makes another point. Emphasis on charity in Islam is another thing that he respects and I respect too. And okay, so question from Haram Doodles, another friend of the channel. Good to see you as well. So Haram Doodle says, "Hi, buddy bud. Good to hear from you. Good to hear from you. Of your question. Okay, is there anything you miss about Islam?" I'm going to be very unoriginal here and say that I do miss that feeling of being part of a big community that you felt was, on the right side of history or of humanity or of existence, and taking comfort from that, from not feeling alone and from being connected more to my roots. Because whether I like it or not, as an ex-Muslim today, Islam is a big part of my roots. So I do miss that feeling of being connected to a community that it's really hard to have beyond an organized religion, to be honest. Although I hope that with channels like this or secular societies that could change, but it's much more dynamic to have a religion do that, because it promises you an afterlife and objective meaning and all that. So it's hard to combat that, even though they don't really have anything tangible to base those promises on. So community is one thing I miss, and I suppose I miss the certainty I felt about life. Like in one sense, it was almost like I was caught between two modes. So there was the mode where I was afraid of hell and afraid of suffering, obviously, and afraid of really bad things happening on the day of judgment, as Islam says there will be, so on and so forth. And I was always, self-conscious about God watching me all the time. But I believed that I was, one of the good Muslims, a true believer, and that God loved me, and it felt good to know that all the bad things that happen in life, they're going to be justified, rectified in the afterlife, that they're part of God's plan, and that no matter what bad things happen, I'll be with God in paradise in the end. And that made me not worry about a lot of things, even the bad things that could possibly happen, like me getting cancer, my parents dying. And so, in a way, I do miss that, having that certainty and comfort. It's just once you open your eyes to how there's really no basis for those things, then you can't go back to it. And also, it just comes with this dark side of this God who's testing you and watching you all the time. Where I think that if uh, if those things were real, it would actually be really horrible and then kind of terrifying. Okay, so thank you for that question as well. Okay. Another question from Mr. Harris. Are you 100% sure Islam is not the truth, or is there a little voice at the back of your head that sometimes makes you doubt? I can 100% say that no part of me has a doubt that Islam is not the truth. I don't think I've ever seen any piece of evidence that sorry, that Islam is the truth. So there's a part of me that wonders maybe there is some sort of God, but I don't see any connection between the Islamic gods to that real true creator of the universe, if it does exist. So yeah, no doubts there. Okay, let's see. Another question here from Proof is in the pudding. I have another question. Do you really think we can afford to go through another long reformation of Islam akin to Christianity? The Muslim world is much more populated and needs to catch up faster. So that's a really good question. And one of the questions I got last month ties into this. So I'll answer yours quickly and then get to that other question. I think it's a thing of we don't really have a choice whether we can afford to or not. It's kind of inevitable. You're not going to get every Muslim just leaving Islam overnight. You can't coerce people to leave Islam. I would never advocate anyway for people to be forced or coerced to leave Islam. So the long process is just going to have to be the long process. There's no real way out of it. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of millions of people, and we're talking about a drastic change in the structure of society. So obviously there's going to be a lot of negative consequences to this being a long approach. And one of the things that we're going to see and that we're seeing right now is that there's going to be segments of Muslim societies that regress and want to go back to a more devout and more restrictive form of Islam. And that's what we're seeing with the Salafism movement, for example, or the Wahhabis. So that's just going to be inevitable. There's going to be reactions to counter the major trend and change, and that's going to slow the whole thing down. But that's just the way it's got to be. Yeah. All right. So now I'm going to jump to a question from Smile for Peace 1C. So thank you for your question, Smile for Peace. So Smile for Peace is a Muslim. So they say, as a Muslim, what if humanity is a creation in progress, with our purpose being to evolve and strive toward reflecting the attributes of God to the fullest extent of our abilities? Could the advancements we see today, like crossing the globe in hours instead of years or collaborating instantly through technology, be evidence that we're moving in the right direction, aligned with our purpose of continuous improvement, change, and striving for excellence? And here's where the question gets even more interesting. As we evolve, could we also become more accepting of diversity, embracing ex-Muslims, LGBT individuals, and minorities, while recognizing that God is the laws of nature, understood through knowledge and science, to which most of us already submit? In this sense, could it be that we are all Muslims, united by our shared alignment with these universal truths? Whoa, okay. That one stood out to me right away as a very interesting one. So it was a long one. So let me just put it in the live chat so you can all read it. So it had to come in a couple of separate chats because I think there's like a limit to the number of characters in a live chat comment. So I hope you can kind of get the sense of it. Duh, 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 duh. Oh, it didn't come out in order, so I'm just gonna remove those and try to just get them in again in the right order. Okay. So Hassan Radwan says, sounds like a new age hippie Islam. So yeah, I think it's going to take a little bit too long to organize it all to be in the live chat. So I'll just kind of summarize it. So the question is asking, could 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 Islam essentially just evolve to be more accepting and be just part of humanity's progress and evolution and uh, in terms of reflecting the attributes of God. So us progressing and advancing is getting closer to God and uh, reflecting what He's all about more. So in that sense, could it be that we're all Muslims united by these universal truths? So I would say I don't know how much of a connection this would be with the Islam that I know or the Islam in the Quran. So here's the thing that Muslims are in a lot of ways stuck with, and that's the Quran. So they're stuck with having to believe that the words of the Quran are the direct revealed words of Allah, God. So from 1400 years ago. So you kind of have to defend or justify or rationalize or explain uh, all those things that are in the Quran. And I think a lot of the things that you mentioned in your comment, Smile for Peace, don't really fit in with what the Quran says. So, can there be embracing of ex-Muslims or LGBT individuals? Yes, but if the reformation that happens in Islam is to just disregarding those parts in the Quran, and you could argue that that is kind of what happened with Christianity in the Bible, where a lot of Christians don't really practice or implement some of the weirder, wackier things that are in the Bible. For example, the slavery parts are kind of glossed over, or they're dismissed. They're dismissed as, well, that was for a specific time and context. And I've heard some Muslims say that about the slavery condoning parts of the Quran as well. So perhaps part of the reformation of Islam will be one where more and more Muslims just see, okay, you know what? We don't need to take everything from this book. Clearly, there are some things that just don't work in the world today anymore. And obviously, there's going to be the Muslims who counter that and say, no, we must stick to everything in the Quran, even if it seems regressive or negative or harmful. So you're going to have those two competing forces happening. The other thing I want to just talk about in that question is this idea that we're evolving to some sort of perfect state. Maybe you want to call that state the state of God. And I don't really see human history that way, of us being in this upward trajectory. So to just go back to a few of the examples that you mentioned, uh, could the advancements we see today, like crossing the globe in hours instead of years, or collaborating instantly through technology? So they ask the question, could this be a step in the right direction? So depending on who you talk to, or how you look at these things, those could be good things or they could be bad things. Like you could let's talk about social media. So social media has connected so many of us instantaneously. I can correspond with my relatives across the world, when even when I was just a teenager, or a young kid, that would have been very difficult to do. It would have to be over a long distance phone call or letters or things like that. But now I can just talk to my parents on WhatsApp all day and night if I wanted to. So that's like a possible good thing from technology. But then if you think about all the destructive effects of social media that I'm sure a lot of you know very well, uh, to just name one example, it would be just the way that it creates echo chambers, and where it's like very easy to spread misinformation and hate and obsession with things that don't really matter, how it contributes to negative body issues for both men and women. Uh, so I think that there's an argument where some things could be good, some could be bad. So I don't think you can even say that traveling quickly is necessarily a purely positive thing. And when you think about how we've developed our weapons, where we have more and more destructive weapons that are capable of causing more and more suffering, is that progress necessarily? So I really reject this whole idea that we're going from this point A that's not as perfect to a point B that's perfect and closer to God, whether you believe in the God of Islam or a more kind of abstract notion of a loving, benevolent force in the universe. So yeah, I don't really see it in that way whatsoever. So I don't think we have Islam in common that way as a universal thing. But what we can do is find the things that uh, do unify us and things that make life better and try to work on those and try to learn from the mistakes of the past as best we can. But you know, if there's a future disaster or something, we're going to start from square one, and maybe there's a different goal for people in the future. I really don't know for sure. So in the live chat, have you forgot the Uyghurs, Ali? I haven't seen you in a long time. Good to see you. Uh, you can join in the live chat and ask questions if you'd like. I'm not doing any live calls for this, if that's what you mean, or having any guests. I might do that in future live streams this upcoming year. But if you have any questions for me, feel free to ask. So I do have a few other questions saved in the live chat, but I'm just going to get to the prepared questions first. Okay. Mojo, I'll get to your question as well. Thank you for the reminder. Okay. So, next question. Oh, this one was a good one. So, this is from Soph Alexa on Instagram. So, Soph Alexa asked, what would you say to someone who's looking to convert to Islam in order to warn them about what they're getting into? So, here's the thing that I would this is a tough one because there's so many things that you could warn them about. I think the best way to start is with the Quran and the Hadith. So, what I would tell anyone considering converting to Islam is before you convert, I think the least you can do is actually read the Quran from cover to cover. It's not that long, it's not as long as the Bible. And uh, if you're reading a translation, that's fine, but the most important thing is to read it with a tafsir, so a scholarly explanation of uh, everything that's in the Quran. So what I think happens in a lot of cases is a lot of people don't actually do that. They don't actually take the time to read the Quran, or at least they don't read all of it while understanding what they're reading. They'll hear the Quran, they'll hear it being recited, they'll hear the call for prayer in a mosque, and they'll just romanticize the language that's foreign to them. And I think that's another aspect of it where if you're a convert from another culture, that you think that there's something that's more what's the word of I'm thinking of, something that's connected, something you don't understand. So you don't see it for what it is. You see it as, wow, this is this something that's very ancient and it belongs to another culture. And you can really see this as well with things like how Buddhism and Hinduism really appeal to people in the Western world. Something about it being from a foreign culture adds to the appeal. But if you take that step of reading the Quran, and I think a lot of the things in there speak for itself. So if you see the talk about slavery and sex slavery, the talk about the punishments for the disbelievers, the talk about how there's different standards for men and women when it comes to a lot of things. I think that can be really eye-opening. The talk about the punishments of hell, and how God is always watching you, and this is especially true once you start going into the hadiths. So there's a lot of hadiths that are the recorded uh, oral statements of the Prophet Muhammad. Whether or not they actually were or not, what is kind of irrelevant. What matters most is that a lot of Muslims believe that they're actually what the Prophet Muhammad says. And if you take just a couple hundred of the most popular ones that come in collections and read all those things too, then you can make your decision. And I think you don't really have to go beyond there. You don't have to go into things like, well, did you know the Prophet Muhammad married a 6-year-old, which is in one of the hadiths too, by the way. But I don't think that would necessarily work because there could be some kind of justification, rationalization that a scholar will provide you. So if you're someone seeking to convert, look into those things for yourself first and try to think if they resonate with you before you have some Muslim trying to rationalize it. So I hope that answers that question. That's a really good one. I really think just more information, more education is the key when it comes to these things. Yeah. Okay. So also got a super chat from Stop Scamming Man. Thank you so much. Uh, so the question is, did the fancifulness and fairy tale qualities of the story of Sulaiman and also Moses and Khidr in the Quran bother you as a Muslim? I would say uh, no. Maybe you can explain in a few more details what you mean by that exactly, because I looked at it, and this is something I explained in my uh, leaving Islam full story video that I did recently. I kind of saw the stories of the Quran, the stories of Islam, as like a real life Lord of the Rings. So I didn't really see them as fanciful or as fairy tales. I saw them as this actually happened, and it was more astounding because I felt like all these things are part of this true story of the battle between good and evil, and I'm on the side of the good, and that made me really happy. But if you want to just ask me another question, maybe specify exactly what you mean by those qualities that might have bothered me or that might have bothered you, I'd be happy to answer that one further. Okay. Okay. Another question from Skeptic Samir. Thank you so much for your question. Good to see you here as well. Uh, any book that you would recommend that you read recently and found a new concept or new perspective on Islamic deconstruction? So, uh, I'm trying to think of a book that might reflect that. So I have to be honest, I don't find that many books that often that provide new concepts or new perspectives on Islamic deconstruction. If you have a recommendation, I'd be happy to just mention it to everyone as well. There's one book that, let me just look up the title to make sure I get it right. One book that really resonated with me, I did read it a couple years ago, and it was written by a Canadian Muslim author. His name is Omar Muallim, and it's called How Muslims Shaped the Americas Praying to the West. And that book really resonated with me because it did two things. The book again is called Praying to the West. I might just put the name in the live chat as well. Praying to the West. Okay. Okay, so I liked two things about this book. So first of all, it talked about the different Muslim communities and how they came together in different countries in North, Central, and South America. So first thing you get from that is a different perspective on Muslim communities than you would normally see, because a lot of the focus tends to be on Europe and the Muslim world, obviously. But the other thing was a lot of it was about the writer's journey to try and go from wanting to from being largely irreligious but still feeling a yearning towards his roots, to the religion of his forefathers that gave them meaning and that he realized also gave him meaning in his life, even if he didn't necessarily believe everything that was in the Quran or believe that there was God. So for me personally, I wouldn't go down that path. But I understand why other Muslims who you might say are more like cultural or secular Muslims would go down that path. And I do think it's an interesting way of looking at Islam uh, in a new light, where uh, I guess you could call it Islam light, or I guess cultural Islam is a better way of explaining it. And we're seeing more and more of these cultural Muslims with every passing year, especially in the Western world. So, but yeah, if you have a recommendation, I would love to mention it. Okay. Okay, Mr. Harris, thank you for more questions. Okay. Okay. So, Mr. Harris asks how to avoid depression when you suddenly realize Islam was a hoax all along, but it's been a major part of your life. Oof, that's a tough one because for me, the gateway out of Islam was actually being depressed and realizing that Islam didn't give me comfort in life. And I think what makes it so tough is that when I did finally realize that, you know what, I have no good reason to believe Islam is true, it didn't really solve my depression. It just made me have to figure out why I valued the things in life that I did and what my foundation in life now was without any form of belief, religious belief whatsoever. And I think in a real sense, if you're feeling depressed after you leave Islam, and when you realize that you had no good reason to believe it, uh, I think it's unavoidable, and you just have to go through that process. And in a way, it's unfair because for many of us, we're just born into it and taught that it's true all of our lives, and so we don't really have a choice in the matter, and yet then it's stripped away, and then we can't believe it anymore. So in the end, what you have to do is try to think about the things that matter to you in life, why they matter to you, the things that resonate as true most to you, that feel fulfilling to you. And I think for a lot of people, it's those things that are fulfilling and that resonate to a lot of us, and that's connecting with others, helping others, being part of something that's bigger than ourselves. And we don't need Islam to do that. It's just a little bit of a journey to try and find that without Islam, without those connections, without those roots. And it's going to take a long time. For some people, it takes less time. So some people, it takes even longer. It takes years and years and years. And unfortunately, there's no real way to avoid that. I have to be honest. But thank you for the question. Okay. So, question. A super chat from General Skeptic. Thank you so much. So, General Skeptic says, "Hi, Alim. Were you disappointed when you first read the Quran? Because I legit thought I must have got the wrong book. It didn't meet my expectations of a perfect book at all. It was so frustrating." Okay. Well, okay. I'm gonna answer this question in a little bit of a different way because when I first read the Quran, I was really young, like 8, 7, 9, something like that. So, no, I wasn't disappointed. I would say my feelings were confusion, but also self-satisfaction. So I felt so pleased with myself for, okay, finally, I'm doing one of the things that Muslims are supposed to do, which is read the Quran and just have the words of God on your lips. Uh, but because I was so young, I didn't really, and because the Quran is in this old classical Arabic that no one uses in life today, in day-to-day life, I didn't understand a lot of it. So I was very confused, but I felt like, well, this is the word of God, so it's still a good thing. So how I'll answer this question then is, how did it feel to read the Quran once I didn't believe in Islam anymore? And yeah, I mean, the first thing that really stands out to you is, what exactly is so special about the Quran that you could say that it's a perfect book? And what does it mean for a book to be perfect in the first place? There's no real way to quantify how a book could be perfect, even if it's the Quran. And what you'll hear Muslims saying is that, well, it's just, it has so many levels of beauty. Uh, the 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 rhythm of it, the structure of it, the how it sounds, how it echoes through your body when you hear its words, the scientific facts in it that couldn't have been known to man, the miraculous prophecies in it, the numerical symmetries in it. There's the same number of times that I can't remember specifics now, but the same number of times heaven is mentioned is the same number of times that hell is mentioned, life and death, or whatever they happen to be. Uh, so they'll say all of those things, but once you take away your bias of belief, what you'll notice is, yeah, it's not a great book. It's very repetitive, first of all, and it's very ominous. There's a lot of time devoted to uh, threats, to what will happen to the disbelievers. Whether you warn them or not, the disbelievers will do this and that and this, and they will receive a horrible punishment, and they have been warned. And so, the one thing I'll say is, and this is something that might be interesting to non-Arabic speakers, when you read or hear the Quran not in Arabic, it really does lose a lot of its uh, artistic power, and you just read or hear those words in their raw bluntness, and it's more upsetting than hearing it in the beautiful flowery Arabic. So I will say that General Skeptic, I had the same feeling as you of being very frustrated that this is a book that is so revered by so many people, and yet I don't see a really good basis for it to be revered beyond it being told to everyone that it's something that you have to be revered. So in that sense, it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Thank you again for the super chat. Okay. All right, let's see. What if I'm wrong and Islam is true? Asks Fakhar. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing it. Uh, Oh, and you also sent me a super chat of that variation of that question. What would you say to Allah if Islam turns to be true at the time of death? Well, thank you for the super chat, and I think that's a good question to ask. Well, first of all, maybe I am wrong. Maybe I am wrong. I don't know 100% sure that God isn't messing with me and is just giving poor evidence for his existence through the Quran or whenever it is, if we're talking about the Islamic gods. But I'll stick to what I said earlier in this live chat, that uh, I see no good reasons to believe that Allah is real, which is why I don't have any doubts about it. Uh, so, what would I say to him? I would say, you created me. You knew I would leave Islam, and you gave me the mind that I have that could only come to the conclusion that it did, that I see no good reason to believe that you exist. And I had to follow my mind and my heart in that sense. I couldn't live a life where I was just believing in something for wishful thinking or through fear, for something that could very well not be true because I saw no good reasons for it to be true. And if you decide to still punish me and send me to hell, then it's out of my control. You're going to do whatever you're going to do. And I try to be a good person. I try to help other people. I try to think beyond myself. And uh, I try to leave the world a better place than what I found it to be. And if you still think that I'm worthy of going to hell, then I can't say that you're a good God, but you're God, so you're going to do what you're going to do. So I hope that answers your question. Okay. All right. Let's see what we got here. So Mojo, I think, okay, I see your question. If you're still in the live chat, your question is, do you know about synchronity? Search it, and that is one reason I am a theist. So I'll quickly search synchronity. Do you mean synchronicity? If you're still there, Mojo, let me know. So I think you might mean synchronicity, which, according to Google, is a phenomenon in which people interpret two separate and seemingly unrelated experiences as being meaningfully intertwined. But I have a feeling that's probably not the meaning that you mean there. So if you're still there, Mojo, feel free to ask the question again. Just explain what you mean by synchronity, or if you meant synchronicity there. Okay. All right. We're almost at the hour point. Oh my. Okay. Unexpected Lots of questions here. Thank you, Peter Bergerson, for the reminder. Don't forget to like the stream. Yeah, please, everyone, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Should mention also that if you want to support the channel as well, I do have a Patreon and a PayPal. So if you want to support my channel for Patreon, the link is below. And just thank you to all my subscribers. You can see uh, we have different tiers for different levels of support. If you want to make a one-time donation, you can do so through PayPal, and that helps me do more and more videos like this one. And one thing that I've been able to do just in the past couple of months, just with the support from Patreon, is I hired a video editor, and he's edited already a couple of my videos, and that's really freed me up to be able to do more videos. So thank you again to everyone for your support. And if you want to support my channel, feel free to do so. And Fakhar, thank you for saying that. Fakhar was the one who asked me what I would say to God if Islam turned out to be true. Glad I could help you there. Okay. So, all right. Got a couple more questions on Islam to get to. And then I'm going to jump to the next subject. So for those of you who don't know, I'm Palestinian in my background. So I got a couple questions about Israel and Palestine. So I'll get to those shortly. But let's do the Islam questions. Let's finish those first. So at Sarah Kunbi 621, thank you so much for the question, Sarah, longtime follower of my channel. So Sarah's question is, what do you think it will take for the death penalty for apostasy to be abolished in Muslim countries? That's a really good question. So what would it take? I think it's, again, this process of slow moderation, or of Islam becoming more and more moderate. That's already happening. I think that's what it's going to take. It's going to just take, I think it's a matter of time. What it's going to be is that more and more people around the world are going to just believe that having a death penalty just for leaving a religion is a barbaric thing to do. And what will happen is, as there's more of an influence from secular parts of the world in the Muslim world, there's going to be more pressure on governments in the Middle East and the Muslim world to relax those kind of laws or to not enforce them as often. And this is something I've repeated many, many times now in this live stream. We're going to get the counter view, the opposition from the people who are like, no, this is where we need the death penalty even more. And you're going to get people like Daniel Hakikachu, who's a Muslim apologist who lives, I think, in the United States, or he lives in the Western world anyway, saying that, well, if you have Sharia law, then yeah, the death penalty has to be there for apostasy because it sows discord in the Muslim community, so on and so forth. So you'll have that fighting back against the bigger trend, which I think is more relaxation on some of the crueler, more barbaric aspects. And if you look at the Muslim world, there are a lot of Muslim countries that don't enforce certain things, like, chopping the hands off of a thief, for example. Or there are a lot of cases where there are people who are, part of the LGBTQ community, or who have left Islam and it's known, and they aren't executed. And so I think there's like a key difference also between what a state will do, so to have in their law books apostasy being punishable by death, and what Muslims will do as individuals or as vigilante groups or whatever, where they take someone in their community and they discover that they've left Islam, and then they take justice in their own hands and kill them. So that's a separate thing. That will probably last for a much longer time. And I think, again, it's just this part of increasingly trying to secularize Muslim communities where they don't take Islam as seriously and don't enforce things like killing people for leaving it, because they'll understand from their own, knowledge and education that that's a horrible thing to do, whether or not it says that we should do it in the Quran or not. So Raisa, yeah, you do have a good point. In a way, they're not wrong. Leaving Islam does sow discord, and that's why you have these kinds of threats. And I think it's this viewpoint of society and how it should operate that's so archaic and that needs to go. And that's the view that if we want people to not do things, then we have to have draconian punishments. We have to threaten death and suffering and the punishment of hell and so on and so forth. And I don't like that way of running a society because it runs not just on fear, but it runs on like a paranoid level of fear because you're attaching God to it, and where you can't even trust your neighbors. And what you're going to do is you're just going to suppress those things. You're not going to get rid of them. So they're going to continue to exist. So in that way, it's gonna backfire. So I saw a question earlier that might be interesting to. Oh, here it is. So a question from Murad Balak. So question is how you overcome the fear of hell. I think the most important thing to do is once you've taken that step of no longer believing Islam to be true, it's totally understandable that you would still feel that, you know uh, what if there is that chance that it is real and then I might end up in hell? Should I just still keep believing uh, just to be safe? So, what I would say is think about all the things that you already don't believe in and that you could possibly believe, like the hells or the punishments of other religions from other gods, or not even that. But what if we're, I don't know, uh, what if we're like a big alien experiment, and then once we die, our souls are taken back to this alien planet to be probed and tortured and torn apart as part of scientific experiments or something? I don't know. Can you really fully rule that out? And when you say maybe the aliens have us mind controlled so we don't remember them, but we're going to go back and be experimented on, you can't fully rule that out. But do you worry about that? No. And you don't worry about the other million possible hypothetical things that have no good evidence for them. So I would say once you look at hell, the hell of Islam that way, it will become easier to no longer be afraid of it. So thank you for that question. Okay, and Tabassum Kareem, sorry for not seeing your question earlier, if you're still there. So your question is, will Khilafah or Islamic Sharia really create an ideal society? How do you visualize an ideal society? So, no, I don't think it would create an ideal society for the reasons that I shared for a couple of my answers. I think it will create a society that's ruled by draconian laws enforced through fear and indoctrination and suppression, and it will lead to a lot of people lashing out against the state, against each other. And I think, in a way, that kind of answers a question that the second part of your question. I don't know if there is such a thing as an ideal society that I visualize in my mind, but I think what's most important is that you're never going to have a perfect society. You're going to always have people disagreeing about key things, and that's because people are coming from different contexts, different backgrounds, different realities, different levels of wealth, different experiences. And so I think the key thing is to have a forum where all these things can be debated and discussed and compromised on, because in the end of the day, you're not going to get everybody agreeing on everything. The only way forward is through compromise, and with an Islamic society, there is no compromise. You have to follow what Islam says, or more importantly, what the leaders in the country say Islam says. And so what I would want is a society where you're free to criticize Islam, criticize the rulers, criticize the government, where you're free to propose alternative solutions and you don't have to worry about going to jail, and where you're free to criticize whoever you want. And I think in the end of the day, that's what you see happening in a lot of the Western countries. And again, while they're not perfect, I think it's important to have that forum. And that way, you don't have the same level of suppression and resentment bubbling in. And that's where really the problems start coming out, when a lot of people feel like they aren't represented and that their needs aren't being met. And which is why there are problems happening in countries like the US or in Europe, because that is what's happening. There's a lot of people that feel silenced and that feel powerless. And so what we need to do is give people a voice to be able to express themselves and to have their needs being met. That's not saying just agreeing with whatever anyone wants, but to be part of that conversation is what's most important. So thank you for that question. All right, let's see. Oh, thank you, Shady. Shady is one of my supporters, Patreon supporters. No questions. Just wanted to thank you for your efforts and hard work. Thank you so much. And just regarding the hell question, so a couple things from people. Um, Hassan Radwan says, learning about how the concept of hell developed historically really helped me. And Hassan recommends Bart Ehrman's book on hell, which is Heaven and Hell, a history of the afterlife. All right. So Isbaturaha says something interesting. The problem with anti-Islam content is you guys don't present a better alternative uh, to Islam. So I will say this to that I think for a lot of ex-Muslims, the first real step is getting over Islam before they can even think of a way to have an alternative to it, uh, to have something in their life to replace it, which is why a lot of ex-Muslim content focuses on that transition. And I would say that is true to a certain extent with some of the content that I watch on YouTube or whatever social media, where it seems like a lot of the focus is just criticizing religion, criticizing Islam. And what I would say is the most important thing is, yes, to try and present alternatives. And those alternatives do exist. For example, on my channel, I talk about humanism, I talk about secular paths to finding fulfillment and meaning. And a lot of that is connecting with yourself and the things that matter to you and finding ways to value them without needing some external entity beyond yourself that isn't human or needing an afterlife. And so I would agree with you, generally speaking, that there needs to be more of an effort in presenting alternatives to Islam, but better alternatives, in my opinion, do exist. All right. And Raisa asks, have you ever had to deal with anyone taking your apostasy as a personal attack? All the time, all the time. So what I would say is what happens is that uh, people view my problems with Islam as an attack on them. And one of the reasons for that is, and I can relate to this because I was the same way, that Islam is seen by Muslims as a core part of their identity. So when you say, "Oh yeah, you know what, I was Muslim and I left," and when you explain that you left for because you didn't think there were good reasons to believe, what you're saying is two things. One, that you think that the things that they believe in as their core part of their identity is not good, but also that there's no good reasons to believe them. So what you're saying is that they're believing for bad reasons. And so they're going to be offended and then lash out on you. So this is something I've dealt with a little bit in my personal life. I've been fortunate enough where it has never really become hostile. If anything, it's usually Muslims trying to convert me back. So saying, we should go pray together. We should go to the mosque. Why do you never want to go to the mosque? Or so on and so forth. So they're trying to help me. I will say that people are significantly more unpleasant online, and by that I mean Muslims. And I've been accused of everything, that I'm a paid shill of Israel or Christians, paid to make Islam look bad. Of course, the problem of that is that I criticize Christianity as well on my channel, and I criticize Israel on my channel too. So much for that. And I'm going to get to the Israel-Palestine questions very soon. Um, and I've been accused of being a liar, of being ignorant, of never having really been a Muslim, of having believed Islam for the wrong reasons, of having never really given Islam a true chance in my heart. And I would say that's all false. I did truly believe Islam. Islam was in my heart. And it was actually me learning more about Islam that led to me leaving it. It was me honestly looking at Islam that made me leave it. So, in the end of the day, as much as they're personal attacks, I don't take them personally because I know where people are coming from and I'm confident and comfortable in my own beliefs and in why I believe the things I do and why I don't believe the things that I don't believe in. And I made sure before I embarked on this journey of talking about Islam, criticizing Islam, that I felt comfortable in that way because people can be vicious online. And I think you have to have the armor or, self-awareness and self-confidence to be able to handle those things before you can really wade in into this world, or else yeah, it can be quite unpleasant. And yeah, Shane, Israel isn't getting anything for their money if they are paying me. Yeah. Okay. Hamza asks me, does it bother you that Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world by conversion according to Pew Research? No, no, it doesn't bother me. I mean, it's one of the things that motivates me to keep talking about this stuff, talk about the issues of Islam and organized religion, um, because that's just going to happen no matter what I do. Really, in a sense, like Islam's going to keep growing, but I do feel like I'm part of the conversation that will help to normalize leaving Islam as much as that there are others that will continue to convert. And again, like I said before, my goal is not to force anyone to leave Islam. I want people to leave of their own volition with more information and education. And unfortunately, as Hamza points out, I don't know if this is true or not, but I'm very sure that there's people who are converting to Islam or being born into Islam all the time. That's just the way it is with indoctrination, and all we can do is just share more information. And thank you for your comment, Paige. Been watching Christam Prince lately. Never heard of them. The amount of people who leave Islam on his program is amazing. I'll check that out. Okay. And Hassan Radwan clarifies. So it's not the fastest growing religion by conversion. It's the fastest growing due to birth rates. Okay, interesting. All right. So many really good questions here. Oh, I still have a lot. I'm not actually not sure if I'm going to be able to get through all of these questions in this live stream because we're already at an hour and 17 minutes, but let's try our best. Okay. So the next question is from Alexander Best the from Instagram. So their question is how to properly address the problems of Islam within Islam without letting people use those same issues as an excuse to justify whatever colonialism or imperialism they defended at the moment. All right. So here's the thing. That's a really tough one to do, and I'll repeat it one more time because it's a little bit of a nuanced question. So, how to properly address the problems within Islam without letting people use those same issues as an excuse to justify whatever colonialism or imperialism they're defending at the moment. So, you'll get this often where people will say, we need to have more Western influence on the Middle East or the Muslim world because Islam is toxic, and we need to have more Western intervention, military intervention, and more Western style democracy, so on and so forth, because Islam is horrible and the West is just better. Uh, I think there's a few problems with that kind of narrative. So here's the thing with it that uh, I don't think we can just transplant everything that works in Europe or North America and just, thrust it upon the Middle East, let's say, and boom, everything is going to be better. And I don't think that everything that is in the Muslim world or the Middle East or whatever is bad. I think one of the things that I would say after having lived in both parts of the world, and this is again speaking kind of generally, one of the things that I think is done better in the Middle East is more of a focus on the collective and more of a focus on supporting people in your family compared to more of the, I would say, selfish individualism that you see in in the Western world, where you're kind of like every man or whoever, every person for themselves. So I do think that there's some things that can be preserved and protected in other cultures, and we shouldn't just think that, oh, everything in the West is better, and then we just have to transplant them into the Muslim world. So, so here's the thing to keep in mind with that. So, how do you address the problems within Islam? So, I think that one of the key ways is to focus on Islam as a philosophy, as a group of ideas and teachings, instead of focusing on uh, the Muslims themselves, criticizing the Muslims. Oh, they're a backwards people. Uh, they're evil, they're corrupt, they hate women, so on and so forth. I don't think that's really productive. I think the key is to look at why some of the problems in the Muslim world manifest. Why is there a lot of homophobia? Why is there a lot of misogyny? Why is there a lot of abuse of women? And a lot of it can be rooted in those religious ideas. And some of it is connected to what I was saying earlier, that prioritization of family. So there is a point where valuing the family over the individual can become toxic, where the individual loses their freedom. And I think what matters most is finding that balance. And see, this is the key in these things, to not paint things with like a broad stroke, with a broad brush, and oversimplify and say, everything in Islam is bad, Islam is horrible, and that's the reason why the entire Muslim world is backwards. That's not a really good way of looking at it. I think the key is to look into the nuances, look into the ideas and how they impact people, and to try and reach Muslims in that way, instead of attacking them as human beings. So I hope that answers that question. That one alone, I could talk probably for an hour about it. But thank you again. Okay. And tied to this, and this is going to be our segue into the Israel and Palestine questions. I'm just going to take a sip of water. And by the way, for everyone in the live chat, just a reminder in case you joined a little bit later, uh, there is a question in the live chat that's pinned to the top. So, can you have meaning and purpose in life without religion? Yes or no? So, got 90 votes in so far. 84% say yes, you can have meaning and purpose in life without religion. 16% say no. Okay. So the next question is, and this question is from Erikatnas from Instagram. Genuine question. It concerns me to see quite a few ex-Muslims making content that supports Israel no matter what and accuses Americans of hating the West, and that we should be grateful for living in the West, that we aren't allowed to criticize the West. So how should we, as non-ex-Muslims, I'm an ex-Christian, address this, or how can we sympathize while disagreeing? So that's a very, very, very good question. And again, I think it comes down to that element of nuance and empathy. So again, like living in the Western world, I can say that there's a lot of good things and that there's a lot of problematic things. I live in a country like Canada where there is that freedom of speech, freedom of expression. I can write an article about criticizing Prime Minister Trudeau, and it can be published, and it won't be stopped. It won't be censored. There's freedom of movement, freedom of self-expression, freedom of religion, and I think a society that accepts a lot of different cultures. And so these are incredible things. These are very positive things, things that I would praise that exist in the West. But at the same time, we can't be ignorant of the other elements that are really problematic with the Western world. And to just name a few things, it would be uh, the level of complicity of countries like Canada and the US and many countries in Europe in creating so much suffering in other parts of the world. And a lot of that has to do with globalized capitalism, where a lot of companies in countries like Canada, for example, the country I live in, they're essentially exploiting workers in other countries, which has damaging effects to workers in this country because then the jobs go elsewhere where people are paid very little, where there's less in the way of labor protections or safety protections and so on and so forth. And then there's also the military interventions and political meddling of countries like Canada and the US in countries in the Middle East. One example, obviously, that I can mention is the country where I originally come from, Palestine. So, in many ways, Canada, for example, supports what Israel is doing, whereas at least sitting quietly by as it keeps, killing civilians in Gaza and keeps perpetuating its apartheid state that's oppressing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. And so I think what we have to do is compartmentalize those things. So we can't just say, "Oh, Canada's bad, the West is bad because they're doing this in Palestine, or they're doing this in the Middle East, or they're doing this in Asia." And of course, it goes the other way too, as I mentioned earlier. We can't just say, "Oh, Muslims are bad. The entire Muslim world is bad." It's not that simple. So I think the key thing to do is to avoid sweeping generalizations and to address specific issues, because then when you see people criticizing uh, the West just broadly, yeah, you can say, oh well, they're clearly just biased against the West. But if you specify certain things the way I just did, then you can have an actual back and forth and engaging conversation on these specific issues that I would say are problematic. And I think in a way, this whole "oh, you just hate the West" is a deflection tactic to deflect away from the problems of what Israel is doing to Palestinians, and how a lot of us in the West are complicit in that, directly or indirectly. And so I don't think you have to see it as a thing of, well, you're self-loathing. You're allowing the Muslims to just do whatever they want because they are never going to criticize their own societies that way. No, if anything, this is better, because then we actually have, again, that forum to be able to figure out the differences and to find solutions to them, instead of just blanket sweeping statements. All right, so let's see. Uh, let's move on now, finally, to the section about Israel and Palestine. Okay, so question from Andrew Young. Andrew, thank you for your question from YouTube. Cool video idea. Thank you for that. Did your views on Israel change after you moved to the West? That's a really good one, because I think uh, what happens to be the case is that there's people who are Muslims. They hear all this Muslim propaganda about how Israel is evil and how they just want to kill everyone, and how they're demonic and servants of the devil, and how they have to be eradicated. And then they um, come to Canada, or they come to America, or whatever it is, and they finally meet Jewish people. They might even meet Israeli people and realize, okay, these people aren't all monsters. They aren't evil. They aren't demons. They're people just like you and me. And they'll also see through the horrible Muslim rhetoric that wants to just eradicate uh, uh, Israelis, to just wipe Israel off the face of the earth. So here's the interesting for me. So I was a little bit different. So even though I'm Palestinian and I grew up mostly in the Middle East, my household was a bit different. And one of the reasons for that was because we did also spend, like, a part of my childhood and big parts of my parents' lives were spent living in the West. And so we always had that perspective of understanding where the Israelis were coming from, uh, or what the Israeli narrative about Israel and Palestine was. So in that sense, my perspective on Israel didn't change when I moved to the West, because I already didn't demonize them. I didn't see them as monsters. I didn't see them as servants of Satan. I saw them as people, and through exposure to things like Hollywood movies, things like Schindler's List or Spielberg's movie Munich, which I've talked about on this channel before, and just Hollywood culture in general. I was exposed to what Israelis or Jewish people believed about themselves and their history, and the horrific experiences of the Holocaust, and how uh, creating the state of Israel represented to them an opportunity to finally find a home where they could be safe. And so I knew all these things beforehand, and I understood where the motivation was to then try to make sure that they were never in a position again where they would be vulnerable or weak or at the mercy of another state. And one of the things that led to was they, in a way, I guess you could say it's ironic, became an oppressive force against Palestinians, and how they, especially in how they've maintained this uh, iron grip on Gaza and the West Bank and the lives of a lot of Palestinians, and how um, they control who can move where to which part of the country, and how they restrict a lot of Palestinians from returning to their ancestral homelands, people who are descended from refugees, and tons of other ways how they make it hard to build a home, how they revoke Palestinians' IDs in East Jerusalem, for example, if they don't spend if they've been out of the country or out of the city for a certain period of time. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff happening where Israel has tried to make sure that they're the ones with the power, with the political support of the U.S., with a very powerful military. And so even though I saw the problems of all those things, I understood the human motivations for them, even when I was a Muslim living in the Middle East. So that doesn't mean that I wasn't and still am not angry about what the Israeli state is doing to Palestinians today, to innocent women and children, and how it tries to justify its actions. But at the same time, that doesn't make me lose my sense of the humanity of the people involved. So I would never wish for the eradication of the state of Israel, or for Israelis to be e- evicted from their homes, and in some cases homes they've lived in for generations, because again, that's not a solution to this problem. We need a political, peaceful solution, not more violence or more conflict. So thank you for that question. Uh, and this was a very interesting one. So from Wonder Placeholder, also off of YouTube. Have I ever felt sidelined or dismissed by other Palestinians for being an ex-Muslim? Okay, so that's an interesting one, because uh, oh, Andrew's actually here. Thank you so much again for your question, Andrew. Uh, Andrew actually has a follow-up question. Did I have conversations with others in the Middle East when I lived there? Conversations about what specifically about Israel? You can let me know if that's what you meant in the live chat, and I'll be happy to answer it. So yeah, just to go back to the question, have I felt sidelined or dismissed by other Palestinians for being an ex-Muslim? So not from my immediate family, uh, but when it comes to other Palestinians who are in my family, they don't know I'm an ex-Muslim. I avoid talking about it with them, because the tough thing is when things are really really bad in Palestine right now, it just leads to Palestinians clinging more and more to their faith. And so what I'll see from some Muslims, I don't know if they're Palestinian or not, is accusations against me online from this perspective of, when you're criticizing Islam, you're falling into this narrative of how Israel and some supporters of Israel are saying that the whole issue of Israel and Palestine is blind Islamic anti-Semitic hatred towards Jewish people. That's the only motivation. It's the main motivation for why Palestinians resist and fight against Israel, which, of course, in my opinion, is not true. Islam is one factor, but the main factor, of course, is that it's two peoples trying to fight for the same piece of land. So it's not really a religion thing in that sense. It's a territory thing in that sense. And it's a power thing because the Israelis are the ones who have the lion's share of the power. So the concern from some Muslims is that I am helping Israel in pushing that narrative when I criticize Islam and point out all of its problems. And so it is this barrier, this block between me and other religious Palestinians who are still Muslim. And it's the reason why I avoid talking about this stuff with, in particular, my relatives who are still religious, because they're going to see it that way too. Like, why are you shitting on your culture? Why are you shitting on your people's religion when we're in the middle of this conflict with Israel? And that's where I find the problem, because I don't want Palestinians as well. And there are some who do believe this, to be honest, who do see this as a cosmic battle between good and evil, between Muslims and Jewish people, which again is an oversimplification. And so that's why I feel like I have to counter this narrative, because it's not true for a lot of Palestinians. A lot of Palestinians don't see it as, oh, Islam versus good Muslims versus evil Jews. We have to counter these kinds of gross oversimplifications. And Andrew, okay, so about Israel was your question. So, um, did I have conversations with others in the Middle East about Israel when I lived there? I mean, yes, to a certain extent, but they would be very simple conversations, because you're not going to have debates about Israel and Palestine in the Middle East, generally speaking, when you're talking with other Muslims. It's going to be the same kind of thing of, can you believe what those Zionists did now? Can you believe what Israel has done now? I feel so much solidarity for the Palestinians, and so the conversations were never really more in depth than that. I do remember coming across a few people saying, "Oh, those Jews are horrible. Can you believe what those Jews are doing?" And I remember even then thinking, "Well, all Jewish people are not the same. All Jewish people don't." These are things I knew from even when I was a Muslim kid, that all Jewish people don't support Israel. All Jewish people don't support Israel's actions that they've taken against Palestinians. There's a lot of Jewish people that are Israeli, that have a lot of problems with it. So I knew even then, when I would hear Muslims saying it, that wasn't necessarily the case. And it's not something that I argued in a heated way, just because, to be honest, I was a little kid when I lived in the Middle East. All right. Okay, next question. This question is also from Instagram. Kusa88 asks, what do you think needs to happen in Palestinian society for them to be able to achieve statehood with Israeli and American approval? So I wanted to answer this question because I think there's a lot that's revealing it just in how that question is worded. So the question again was, uh, what do I think needs to happen in Palestinian society for them to be able to achieve statehood with Israeli and American approval? So I want you to notice two things here. So, number one, it shifts the onus on Palestinians. Like, Palestinian society has to change in order for them to achieve statehood. And number two, uh, it has to be done with American and Israeli approval. So I think that reflects a couple of very fascinating things about this whole issue. And it's that a lot of people view this thing as, well, Israel has no choice to do what it's doing, and so Palestinians have to change some things in order for peace to happen, and it has to be done with Israeli and American approval, which reveals again that they're the ones who are really in control and really in charge of uh, a peaceful resolution or any kind of two-state or even one-state solution ever happening. And so I would agree with that one part. In the end of the day, Israel, and with its political support from the U.S., they're the ones that will dictate progress towards a peaceful solution because they're the ones who have most of the power. But here's my problem with it. Yes, there are things that need to change in Palestinian society. I think the average Palestinian person, uh, most or hopefully, ideally, all Palestinians need to accept that Israel isn't going anywhere because and Israelis aren't going anywhere because the alternative to that is just horrific violence and ethnic cleansing. So that is one shift that needs to happen in society, Palestinian society, accepting that Israel is here to stay and you can't get rid of them and you shouldn't get rid of them. There's a lot of people that were born there, raised there, and in their own way, they've been indoctrinated too. So uh, advocating for getting rid of them is not a solution. So that is the shift that needs to happen in Palestinian society. But equally important, and I would say maybe even more important actually, is we need to see a shift in Israeli society. And that's the shift that will really be the one that will lead to peace because, again, Israel has most of the power. They're the ones that have a tight control over Palestinians. Obviously, Palestinians will lash out through Gaza or through suicide bombing attacks, uh, uh, through Hamas or whoever it is. Uh, but what we need to do is have a new mentality from Israeli society where they dismantle the apartheid state that they have, where they stop the draconian restrictions on freedoms that Palestinians don't have. Like they don't have many freedoms that a lot of us elsewhere in the world take for granted. Freedom of movement, freedom, freedom to build a home, freedom to return to their homeland, freedom to hold certain jobs, and all that is done under the guise of needing to protect Israeli security, to protect Israelis. But with this kind of mentality, it's just going to make things worse because, again, tying to Islam and trying to suppress people through Islamic draconian commands, the same thing is happening in Israel. You're just repressing people, and so when people are repressed, it's going to come out through lashing out through violence because that's what Palestinians feel like. They don't really have any recourse besides violence. And again, I say this as someone who does not support violence because I don't think it will make things better. But I can see why there are Palestinians who feel like they have no choice besides lashing out uh, in violence. So the 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 answer to your question is, I think focusing on things that need to happen in Palestinian society for them to be able to achieve statehood is missing the key point, which is that things need to change in Israeli society. And as Shane points out in the live chat, here's one of the big obstacles is that a lot of the Israeli hierarchy, they're not interested in a two-state solution, and they're working very hard in a way in which they're fragmenting Palestinian societies and communities. So a two-state solution will become more and more difficult, and you really can see that in the West Bank, where the level of Israeli control with border checkpoints and walls and security forces fragmenting the Palestinian population centers into so many different little areas. They're making and building in more and more settlements. They're just making it harder and harder for, if there ever was some kind of political process to create two states, what would that Palestinian state even look like? What would it be? It would be so fractured and completely under the control of Israel, which is what I think uh, the hierarchy wants, the Israeli hierarchy. Okay, let's see. Let's look at more questions here. Okay. Only on VHS from Instagram says, how would you address ex-Muslims who have been supporting Israel for clout? And this was a question that was also similar to something from Mustafa Jav, who says, how do you feel about well-known ex-Muslim figures being the most unhinged Zionists out there? So whoever could you mean with that? So I can think of a few very prominent ex-Muslim content creators, some of the biggest actually on YouTube anyway, or on social media, who are very, very pro Israel. And I think I think it's really like it's really sad. It's really upsetting because what I've seen in a lot of instances is very dehumanizing language, lacking in empathy towards Palestinians from these content creators, and also really surprising lack of nuance when it comes to the subject of Israel and Palestine. If there's any subject that needs a lot of nuance, it's that issue. So I think, broadly speaking, there's a lot of ex-Muslim content creators who see the Israel-Palestine issue as something that they were indoctrinated about when they were Muslim. So to believe that you know, Muslims, they just wanna they just want to fight the evil Israeli demonic presence, and so that Muslims can return to Palestine, and Islam can rule there again, and that all the stuff that's criticizing Israel and that's uh, supporting or defending Palestinians is part of that pro-Muslim rhetoric. And I would say that's a complete gross oversimplification. One of the most frustrating things is this lumping in of Hamas in Gaza as being representative of the entire issue of Palestinian self determination, which it simply is not. I think you need to look at the factors that led to Palestinians to support Hamas in the first place. For example, when you take away people's hope, when you take away people's homes and livelihoods, and when you continually oppress them and you continually treat them as second class citizens, what are people going to do? It's going to be very difficult for people to react in a rational, non-emotional, understanding manner. They're going to be volatile. They're going to be angry. They're going to be vicious. And what happened was, because of how effective the Israeli domination of Palestinians' lives has been, and how even the Palestinian Authority, which is the ruling authority in the West Bank, has been completely, in many ways, corrupted or just become subordinate to Israeli control, uh, basically as an intermediary for Israeli control. People saw that they had no other alternatives, and so they turned to Hamas, which, ironically, there's evidence online, if you want to look for it, about how Israel elements in Israeli society and the Israeli hierarchy supported the existence of Hamas in order to fracture the Palestinian self-determination movement. And lo and behold, how that has backfired now on them. And so when you give people less and less choice, they'll turn to more and more extreme and violent options. And that is what has led to a lot of Palestinians supporting Hamas. And I say this as someone who doesn't support Hamas whatsoever. I'm just explaining why a lot of Palestinians do support it. And the reason why is because they feel like, not because Hamas is a Muslim militant organization and that will bring Islam back to the position of power in Israel and Palestine. The key thing is that Palestinians want someone to fight to get their freedoms back, to be able to have a homeland again. And they see Hamas as the only realistic way to do that. When in the end, in my opinion, it's just violent lashing out that's just going to make things worse. So, yeah, Mojo, you've listed some of those names. I mean, yeah, Shane as well. So, Apostate Prophet, Harris Sultan, Armin Navabi. Uh, yeah, those are really good examples of people who are supporting Israel through a lot of what it's been doing, even when we've seen, we've all seen the footage of the extensive bombings, the extensive destruction in Gaza that has taken the lives of many, many children, many, many women, and we've seen how flimsy the Israeli justifications are, how increasingly flimsy they've been. And the thing that I always think about is that, let's say, and this is the thing that I don't understand from some of the bigger ex-Muslim content creators, is I can see supporting Israel. I can see thinking that Hamas is a problem. But to just say that, oh, well, it's Hamas's fault, as if Israel has no power in or no choice in doing what it's doing. This is the thing that I don't understand. Because again, we're talking about people. And this is the thing I think that gets forgotten by some of the big ex-Muslim content creators, is that in the end of the day, Muslims are the biggest victims of Islam. Muslims are the ones who've been indoctrinated into it, and they're the ones we need to reach out to the most with the most understanding and empathy. And when they lash out against us, is because we're hitting a nerve. Obviously, when you're hitting people at a nerve, they're going to lash out. So I just see a lot of lack of empathy in things that I can't think of specific examples, but it honestly depresses me when I see ex-Muslim content creators saying things like, you know, fuck around and find out, if, addressed to Muslims, or Palestinian Muslims, uh, when it comes to the issue of Israel and Gaza, or you know, if you didn't want your homes to be bombed, you shouldn't have supported Hamas. If you didn't want your livelihoods to be taken away from you, you shouldn't have tried to fight back against Israel. Or what do you expect to happen uh, to your kids when they're throwing rocks at Israeli tanks? What's supposed to happen? So there's a lot of those kinds of things that happen, and that are said by ex-Muslim content creators, and I don't know what to do beyond just trying to maintain again that empathy for everyone involved, and to address that in the end of the day, Israel does have a choice. Uh, it does have options beyond just the easy route of violence and destruction and dehumanization that we're seeing. Other options are harder: dismantling the apartheid state, giving rights and freedoms to Palestinians. And it's one of those things where they've put their feet on Palestinian necks for so long that they're worried what will happen if they release their foot their foothold on Palestinians' necks even a little bit. And again, back to that whole thing about suppression, repression. It's not going to make things better to keep repressing people. It's just going to lead to more violence in the future. So yeah, that's a really big one. Okay. Last question when it comes to Israel and Palestine, and this one's from Twitter or X, from Spiritual Agnostic. I would love to know what you think would be the best option, although it seems unable to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So I'm going to add, sorry, 1 second here. Yeah, Shane. Shitter could be a better name for Twitter. Oh my God, my voice is starting to give out after 2 hours. Okay, so what is the best option? So I don't know if there's a best option. I know that there's all this talk about two state, one state. I would say it's probably a hybrid between the two of them. I think the first thing that needs to happen, though, is the blanket blind support for Israel that's coming from countries like the US needs to stop, because that is impeding an actual peaceful resolution. It's impeding a process through the UN. It's impeding uh, Israel actually obeying international laws, uh, that it's violating in what it's doing. The vetoes of the U.S. in the UN Security Council is preventing an actual solution from happening. So, step one: take away the blanket blind support for Israel. Step two: Israel needs to dismantle the apparatus of the apartheid state that it's running. Uh, it's really mind blowing when you get into the weeds of all the different ways that Israel has fractured Palestinian society, and how much control it has over Palestinians in the supposedly autonomous regions of the West Bank, and even Gaza. And so the hybrid solution would probably be something like uh, one Israeli state where uh, Palestinians would have some sort of citizenship designation that I guess would be secondary in that sense, where they don't have as many rights as Israeli citizens, but they would have many more rights than they do now, and that Palestinians would live in semi-autonomous, self-ruled regions or zones within Israel. So beyond that, I really can't envision a state where Palestine is actually allowed to be separate without Israeli involvement. And I can't see Israel allowing that to happen, not anytime soon. And I don't think a solution of let's just make everyone equal Israeli citizens overnight will work either, because that could potentially create a lot of inner problems as well. And I think what I don't think the Israeli hierarchy would be interested anyway in giving Palestinians full citizenship. And so some kind of middle ground, like I described, would probably be the best way. So, yeah, yeah, that's a really tough one to answer. Okay, so to just wrap up this live stream, and thank you everyone again for all these questions. Like, there's there's a lot to cover in 2 hours, and I could spend many more minutes talking about a lot of these things. Uh, so what I can only say is thank you again for your support, and if you wanna support the channel, bare minimum, please like this video and please subscribe if you haven't already. Recently hit 5,000 subscribers, which is amazing. I hope to keep growing in the upcoming year. And if you want to support my channel on Patreon, uh, I also have a Patreon, and for one-time donations, I have a PayPal account. So you can find the links to those in the video description below. Thank you to everyone in the scroll below for supporting my channel. I really couldn't do it without your support. So let's check the status of the vote in the live chat. Can you have meaning and purpose in life without religion? 83% said yes, 17% said no. 106 votes. Oh, that's great. All right. So let's wrap up with the final questions. So these are the general questions. So question from Gerwalk, Ben from YouTube. Have your passions changed in the last year? And if so, how? And Gerwalk, you're actually here. Good to see you. Let me see if I can highlight a comment of yours, Gerwalk. Gerwalk, I just want to say to you in particular, thank you so much for supporting me for so long. It really feels better to know that there's people like you out there. So thank you so much again for that. And yeah, glad to see you here. So your question is, have my passions changed in the last year? So I would say that over the past year, and I think this is something that's true for a lot of Palestinians, that I have become much more invested and involved in learning about what is going on in Israel and Palestine, how the Israeli apartheid state works, than I ever did before. And what sparked it for me, as is the case with a lot of people, is what Israel's been doing since October 7th, the October 7th attack in 2023. And doing this YouTube channel, being one of the more prominent Palestinian ex-Muslims out there, I felt this responsibility to try and not only share my perspective, but also to just educate people on the realities of the situation there. And what that's led to is I've been consuming much more content about Palestine and Israel, learning more about the intricacies again, reading many more books. And to be honest with you, it's depressing. It feels I feel very hopeless and very helpless living here in Canada, living a far better life than uh, many Palestinians that are in the West Bank, in Gaza, in the state of Israel. Um, and I feel like this minimum level of responsibility, that the least I can do on this channel, where I know that I do have a forum where people will listen to me, and my words resonate with people, and where I can reach people who support Israel to maybe, just get some new thoughts in their minds, or to just hear a different perspective. I felt this responsibility to do it. And so while it has been emotionally draining to do it, and to deal with a lot of a lot of hate and criticism from people online because I have been criticizing Israel. Uh, I felt like I have to do it because it's the least I can do. So that has been a passion of mine in the past year. And just to lighten things up a little bit, I would say I've gotten into table tennis more in the past year. It started off as a kind of more of like a casual thing to do in the winter when I couldn't play my more uh, the sports I enjoy playing more, like soccer. But I've gone into table tennis much more, and it's been really fun. It's a great way to just keep to stay active, but also it really helps with the spatial awareness, hand-eye coordination, and I've even noticed weird things like, let's say, you're like in the kitchen or something and you accidentally drop a mug. My reflexes are way better in just grabbing the mug before it crashes on the ground now because of table tennis. So just to lighten things up there. And no, thank you for your question, Gurwalk. I really appreciate it. All right. So a question from Michael Hoffman. Sorry about that. Okay. A question from Michael Hoffman is, have I ever considered communism before? So this question was from Instagram. So again, a very, very, very interesting one. So I would say that I've read about communism. I've looked into it. I've never seriously considered it, although I do like some of the ideas of communism. So just to name some, I do like the idea of workers being more involved in the means of production. So let's say that there's a company that the workers would all collectively own uh, that company and share in the profits, share in the decision making, share in how the resources are allocated, so on and so forth. And I do like the whole idea that's kind of tied to mutual aid as well, of distributing things based on people's needs. So So the thing, I was just laughing at Gerwalk's comment here. So I've developed superpowers because of table tennis. Very nice. Yeah. So here's my problem with communism. This is where I would say I have more alignment with socialist ideas, and a simplified way of looking at it is socialism is kind of a stepping stone to communism. So in communism, there would be no private property. Everything would be collectively owned. There would be central planning for everything. Um, I don't know how a communist society could even arise without a lot of suffering, a lot of violence. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of resistance from, if you want to call them, the ruling classes, but the people in positions of power who don't want to give up their power and their money. And what I fear would be the case, and what I'd say we've seen in the attempts to create communist countries, is what we'll see is the people who do end up in power through a communist framework will end up becoming the new elites that are corrupt and that expropriate things and that try to benefit themselves. So I think it's really, really difficult to create a society without a complete, full, and honest buy-in that follows a communist framework, and that there's too many forces, too many people with different contexts, different experiences, different needs for that to actually happen. That being said, I do like something that would be closer to socialism, a nice mix where there are some things that are centralized, things that are key to human beings, like education, healthcare, housing, to to not have those things be privatized, to have them be things that are guaranteed by the state that we are all collectively part of and that we all contribute to, and that we do see more collective ownership of companies where workers are more involved and share more in the profits. I think these things would be very beneficial. So I would say, to summarize, I'm sympathetic to some aspects of communism, and I do like some ideas, but I wouldn't say that I would ever become a full-on communist, because I think that it's not really realistic, and I think it would be very harmful if it was ever actually implemented. I do have some friends who say, so Shane Wilson brings up the examples of, I can pull up the comment here. of Mao Zedong in China and Joseph Stalin in Russia. So arguments I've heard is that, well, those countries were never really communist, and they were more like uh, authoritarian dictatorships with some communist ideas sprinkled in there. And I do see that point. And what I would say is that in practice, how would it happen? I think it's very, very difficult, and that's why I wouldn't really say that I support communism as a goal. And question that came up from Zahra Jawad, ex-Shia Truth Seeker 1. What do you think about Musab Hassan, the pro-Israel Palestinian? So this is the son of Hamas, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So I did notice that he was just on Apostate Prophet's channel a couple weeks ago. I didn't see that interview, but I've seen snippets of things that this person has said before and interviews he's done before on more mainstream news and TV. And I would say again, he's falling into this oversimplification that I've seen from the big ex-Muslim content creators, where they lump the whole thing as this is extremist Islamic terrorism that Israel is fighting against. And it's a way of dismissing the cause for Palestinian self-determination as being illegitimate, invalid, to say, oh, well, we're just dealing with Islamic terrorists. And he's definitely a spokesperson for that. And I would say, obviously, there's problematic things about Hamas. I'm not going to defend Hamas. But I think what we need to do is look beyond the things that someone like this individual is saying, and look beyond Hamas and look at the root causes of the conflict. And so in that sense, I think people like him are a distraction that I try not to pay too much attention to. Okay. All right. And just got a couple more. Question from Robert. Thank you so much for your question, Robert, off Instagram. How do I communicate sensitively and convincingly with people who think everything they say about their own oppressed group is true? So this is a really tough one. I think I'll repeat it just to make sure everyone gets it. So how do I communicate sensitively and convincingly with people who think everything they say about their own oppressed group is true? So there's many ways you could look at this, because it's all about self-identification too, I think. Because if you view your own oppressed group as true, if you view your own group as oppressed, even if that might not necessarily be the case, it doesn't matter because you believe that's the truth. So I would say some parallels that I can think of is that Muslims, one of the biggest religions in the world, they view themselves as oppressed in the world, and maybe it is true that they are oppressed minorities in some parts of the West. But again, it comes back to that issue of self-identification. I think the key has to be that you try and share a different perspective to them. So you try to counter their perspective with your perspective and explain why you disagree. So again, it comes down to conversation, to engagement, not accusation, but explaining why there are differences in your perspective compared to their perspective. And I think the important thing of doing that, and I can reflect on this as someone who used to be Muslim, is that it really took me being in a context beyond the Islamic world to seeing that there are people who believe things differently than Islam, to be open to the possibility that Islam might not be true, and to challenge and navigate my own prejudices, my own biases. So it's really hard to do that, especially when the challenges are coming from someone outside of your own group, especially if you perceive your group as one that's oppressed. And in some ways, I think a good conduit is people who are part of your own group but look at things differently. And so for Muslims, that would be ex-Muslims. And that's one of the reasons why I do this channel and I do criticize Islam, is because I feel like, because I lived Islam and because I come from a Muslim background, the things I say, my criticisms, will have more weight in the minds of Muslims than it would from others who never experienced Islam, who are never Muslim. And so I know that that isn't always possible to be the case if you're someone from outside of that group. But when you understand where people are coming from, and you actually show this group that, okay, I know where you're coming from. I understand that A, B, and C is important to you, and I understand that you feel this way because of D, E, and F. It shows that you're not coming from this place where you just view them as an enemy. Uh, you're coming from a place where you want to connect with them. And I think if you come from that place where people genuinely feel that you genuinely want to connect with them, it can make a really big difference in being persuasive and convincing. Where at least the least you can do is have them listen to you and think about it in their own minds. Because if you're trying to just convince people and say, "Well, you're wrong and I'm right," you're not going to get anywhere. Thank you for that really thoughtful question, though, Robert. Robert always has thoughtful questions. Two more questions left, and I think I might. Oh, wait, three more questions. Okay. Question from Morton in the live chat. What do you think about the new Islamic humanist communities growing forth in the Scandinavian countries? Um, I actually, I actually didn't know about humanist communities in the Scandinavian countries. So I would say that it is encouraging, and it does show that there is a positive influence from Muslims interacting with the secular countries in Scandinavia, which I really admire in a lot of ways. And perhaps that these could be paths forward to things that have happened again, like I mentioned an hour ago, if you were tuning in an hour ago, uh, to the evolution that's happened in Christianity, where it's become more and more moderate, more relaxed, less taken seriously, less taken literally, and where there's, for example, the opportunity to have churches that are united churches that will welcome anyone. They'll even welcome people from other religions, and the whole point of them is to just create a space where people are supported, where people can have classes, where people can gather as a community, and where the role of dogmatic religion is uh, less and less prominent. And if that's what these humanist communities are doing, is these Islamic humanist communities are doing in Scandinavian countries, I can't say that I oppose it, but obviously for me, uh, I would just get rid of the whole Islamic connection altogether, because I think we can have these things without Islam. There are some people who see these things as stepping stones. Maybe there's some legitimacy to that. But for me, I just can't. I can't support them necessarily, because I think in the end they're still sneaking in some, toxic, harmful Islamic ideas, like you know, that there's a God out there who created you and is watching you at all times. How there's a heaven and a hell. These things might sound harmless until you really go in depth into the psychological damage that can come from them. And you can find out about that in my other videos if you want to go into the weeds there, go in depth there. Thank you for the question, Morton. And super chat from Mohsin, another follower and supporter of my channel. Thank you so much for the super chat. So, not religious or political question, but you made enough John Wick references the other day that I must ask: which is your favorite John Wick film out of the four? So, yeah, for those of you who don't know, I was on Apostate Aladdin's channel the other day, talking about the video I did recently about my entire leaving Islam experience, and I made a couple of John Wick jokes. For those of you who don't know as well, John Wick is a action movie franchise with Keanu Reeves. He's basically this assassin who goes on this crusade of revenge that needs four movies to be fully told. The story needs to be fully told. Okay, I would say number one is the best one, which is usually the case with these kinds of franchises. It's kind of diminishing returns. I think you just have the raw emotions of why he embarked on that revenge journey in the first one, and I really liked the actor who's the main villain in the first one. I think he's a Swedish actor, but he's supposed to be Russian in the movie. I can't remember his name right now, but he was a really good villain, because he wasn't just a straightforward, like, ha ha ha, maniacal evil villain. And Keanu Reeves, probably his best acting in the whole franchise in that. And yeah, it's just diminishing returns. um, Otherwise, although you could argue that there were better action set pieces and more creative cinematography and just sets in some of the later movies. But I'm more of a story person, and the story's probably better in the first movie. Thank you again for that question. Okay, down to the last two now. Question from George. George is another longtime follower of my channel. Why is Arab Middle Eastern culture so toxic? So again, not everything is bad about Arab Middle Eastern culture. Again, I do like the added emphasis on family and community compared to the Western world that I've experienced. Uh, but I think there's a lot of major toxic problems in the Arab Muslim world, and that's one of the reasons why I don't live there. And I think life is better in Canada. I think, to speak generally, I would say it has a lot to do with a tradition-based, closed mindset. So turning towards religion like Islam or Christianity, depending on which country you're in, and turning to the way that the ancestors used to do things because that's what worked before. And I think with all of the massive changes that are happening in society today, those structures are too rigid. And it leads to a lot of people leading very miserable lives because they're trying to fit themselves into the boxes of the more rigid Middle Eastern societies. So this leads to people feeling suppressed, people wanting to leave the Middle East. It leads to a lot of things that are problems in the society is not being resolved. Things like misogyny, things like homophobia, transphobia. It can even lead to things like where innovations in areas like technology or science, so on and so forth, aren't as prioritized because what matters most is the maintaining of the current social order. And so, too much innovation, too much change can threaten that. And the other problem is, and I think this has to do with more of the geopolitical situation, is that there's a lot of dictators in place there, and so the dictators, their main motivation is staying in power and maintaining the structures that keep them in power. And this has ripple effects across the society, and that we can have like a whole big debate on why are there so many dictators or authoritarian regimes in the Middle East. And I think a lot of that uh, does have to do with the legacy of Western imperialism, but we can't keep just blaming things in that part of the world on that forever. So what needs to be done is we need to find ways to give people more of a voice, the average person more of a voice, more participation in the political landscape in Arab and Middle Eastern countries. And I think the what we need to make that happen is challenge the authoritarian regimes. How that's going to happen, I don't know. That's a huge obstacle, and it's one of the reasons again why I don't live in the Middle East. But I think that's where it starts, with change in the political structures. And last question from Integrational Polytheism. Thank you for your question. Which, if any, other ex-Muslim campaigners or YouTubers would you like to collaborate with over the next year? So, as those of you who watch my channel regularly know, I always love collaborating with Apostate Aladdin. So I hope to do more of those in the near future. I would love to do a video with Apostate Prophet, or perhaps Atheist Republic's Armin Navabi. Whether that's about, in the case of Armin Navabi, I would want to talk to him about Israel and Palestine. I think that could lead to a really interesting conversation. I've seen a lot of his videos on the topic, and we have some major disagreements. But I've known of him for years, and I've done videos with him in the past, and I always found him to be a nice person, understanding person, which is why his videos more recently have been a little bit surprising to me. But I don't know him that well, and it would be interesting to do something with him about that subject. And the same goes for Apostate Prophet. With Apostate Prophet, the thing that I would be most interested in talking to him about would actually be um, how he often collaborates with David Wood, who's a Christian apologist and preacher, um, and how he rationalizes uh, being so closely aligned with a Christian when Christianity has a lot of the same problems as Islam. And I think this is something that is a bigger issue where there are a lot of Christians in the ex-Muslim space that are trying to promote their religion and maybe trying to just criticize Islam to make themselves feel better about Christianity. And so a lot of them are drawn to apostate prophets. So I would love to do a video of him about that. I have tried, but it hasn't worked out. I'm not sure. Maybe he's not interested. I really don't know. But those are two ones that come to mind. And I'd love to do one with Abdullah Samir as well. He's someone who has been in the space forever. And I think, again, lots to talk about there, about what the future of Islam is like. I think would be a very interesting one to do with him. And beyond the ex-Muslim content creators, there's a few that come to mind. Genetically modified skeptic would be really good. It would be really cool to do something with Matt Dillahunty one day. He's someone who, although I've always had problems with his very aggressive approach in his dealings with theists, I've learned a lot about him. I've learned a lot from him, and I know he does a lot of call-ins with uh, guest hosts on a YouTube channel called The Line. He's not on the Atheist Experience. Um, and yeah, so it would be good to do something with him. But yeah, I think that's everything from me. I might have missed a few questions here and there. I'll do this last one. Sorry if I didn't get to your questions. It's just only so much time. And I'm starting to lose my voice as well. So I think I got to wrap it up after this question from Infinidale. So, Infinidale, thank you so much for the question. How do you think you can gain more allies and or awareness from the ex-Christian or ex-Jewish communities? A couple of ways. I think collaborations on social media, on YouTube, are a really great way of doing that, because the thing that always blows me away is how many shared experiences I've had, in particular with ex-Christians, when it comes to things like fear of hell or fear of being watched by God, or issues with being, disowned or ostracized from religious relatives. I think there's a lot of similarities between how, in particular, Christianity and Islam operate, and we do have a lot of common ground. And so collaborations is the first way. And I think just putting the experiences out there, because I think a lot of ex-Christians, they're not as familiar with the ex-Muslim experiences, or they know only of a few ex-Muslim experiences from the more well-known prominent ex-Muslim voices like apostate prophets. But many ex-Muslims leave for all sorts of different reasons, and so having those voices out there, I think, is the key to doing that. And who knows, maybe there could be a future where uh, formerly religious people from all sorts of different religions could create humanist societies if they feel, that there's enough shared values in there for a collective to form. So thank you so much for that question. So yeah, that's all from me. Thank you again for everyone for watching this video. Please, again, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'm just going to leave it out there again one more time to thank all my patrons for all of your support. 2024 was a really great year for the channel, and I was able to devote more time to the channel, which was really great. And I hope to do it even better this upcoming year. And so if you want to support my channel, links are below: Patreon and PayPal. And thank you to everyone for your super chats and your really, really great questions. And again, I just want to close off by saying, at the end of the day, what I really want people to take away from all these videos is you don't need a religion to find fulfillment or meaning in life. You can do it without religion. You can do it without the promise of an eternal reward. And there's enough in life, with all its challenges, with all its pitfalls, with all its suffering, to make it worth living. And we have each other, and the best way forward is to try and make the world a better place, because that's the only world that we know we have, for sure. So yeah, thank you again, everyone. Thank you, Gurwak. Thank you, Hassan. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Zahra. Thank you, everyone, again. Thank you. It really, really touches my heart that there's so many of you that have been supporting me for years now. and it's better than anything I could have envisioned when I first started off this channel. So enjoy the rest of your Sunday, everyone, and I'll be back with another video very, very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.